They say a mother's love has no limits, that it is a bottomless well, a sanctuary that never closes its doors, no matter how much the world beats against them. We are told from the moment we hold that tiny, fragile life in our arms that our purpose is to protect, to provide, and to sacrifice until there is nothing left of us but a hollow shell. But they rarely warn you about the danger of that kind of devotion. They don't tell you that by pouring every drop of your soul into a child, by shielding them from every consequence and giving them the world on a silver platter, you might just be feeding a monster. Sometimes we love our children so much that we lose the ability to see who they really are until it is far too late. We mistake their arrogance for confidence and their cruelty for a phase. We tell ourselves that if we just give a little more, sacrifice just one more thing, they will finally understand. But some hearts are like sieves. No matter how much love you pour in, they remain empty, cold, and hungry for more. This is a story about the day my well ran dry and the cold, hard truth that finally grew in its place. My name is Jennifer. For 23 years, my entire world was a young man named Brandon. I raised him alone in a house that felt too big for just the two of us, but I made sure he never felt the emptiness. I had kicked his father out when Brandon was just a toddler. He was a man who preferred the bottom of a bottle to the responsibilities of a family, and I refused to let my son grow up in that shadow. I worked 3 jobs in the beginning, scrubbing floors and balancing books, until I eventually built my own consulting firm. I became a millionaire through sheer, bloody-minded determination. I wanted Brandon to have everything I didn't. I wanted him to go to the best schools, wear the finest clothes, and never know the crushing weight of a bill he couldn't pay. But in my haste to give him a perfect life, I forgot to teach him how to be a man. Brandon grew up spoiled, entitled, and deeply resentful. He was a college dropout who spent his days at the gym and his nights at the most expensive clubs in the city, charging it all to the credit cards I paid off every month. He didn't thank me. Instead, he blamed me. He told me it was my fault his father wasn't around, as if the man I had protected him from was some lost hero instead of a deadbeat. The tension between us reached a breaking point on a humid Friday night in April. Brandon had become obsessed with a woman named Alex. She was younger, sharp-edged, and had eyes that wandered toward the price tag of everything she touched. She was a gold digger, plain and simple, but Brandon was blinded. He wanted to impress her, to prove he was the high roller he pretended to be. That night, he headed to a high-end bar downtown, and I could feel a knot of dread tightening in my stomach. I knew he had been drinking before he even left the house. I knew the way he drove when he wanted to show off. So, call it a mother's intuition or a mother's curse, I followed him. I sat in my car across the street from the bar, watching the neon lights flicker. Eventually, I couldn't sit still anymore. I walked inside, hoping to just talk him into letting me call him a car. I found him at a corner table, surrounded by Alex and a group of her shallow friends. He was knocking back bourbon like it was water. When he saw me approaching, his face didn't soften with relief. It twisted into a mask of pure, unadulterated hatred. He didn't whisper. He didn't try to pull me aside. He stood up, knocking his chair back so hard it cracked against the floor. He pointed a shaking finger at me and laughed, a loud, jagged sound that drew every eye in the room. He called me a suffocating, pathetic old woman. He told his friends that I was a stalker who couldn't accept that he was a man now. He leaned in close, his breath smelling of expensive liquor and cheap malice, and told me that the only reason he even looked at me was for the monthly allowance. He said he couldn't wait for the day I finally kicked the bucket so he wouldn't have to look at my tired, desperate face anymore. Alex giggled behind her hand, her eyes glittering with amusement. I stood there, frozen, the heat of embarrassment burning my cheeks. But my heart was doing something different. It was breaking, yes, but it was also chilling. I walked out of that bar without a word, the sound of their laughter ringing in my ears like a funeral bell. I was sitting in my car, shaking, when I saw him storm out 10 minutes later. He was stumbling, fumbling with his keys, and he ignored the valet. He climbed into his black sports car. the one I had bought him for his 21st birthday, and roared out of the parking lot. I didn't think, I just moved. I pulled up alongside him at a red light and jumped out, running to his passenger door. I got in before he could lock it, begging him to pull over, to let me drive. He just sneered at me, his eyes glazed and bloodshot. He told me to shut up and hold on. He floored the gas, the engine screaming as we tore through the city streets. The speedometer climbed, 60, 80, 100. The world outside was a blur of gray and yellow. I was screaming at him to slow down, my hands gripped so tight on the dashboard that my knuckles were white. Then it happened. A flash of a dark coat, a slow-moving figure in the crosswalk. There was a sound I will never forget, a sickening, heavy thud that vibrated through the entire frame of the car. Brandon slammed on the brakes and we fishtailed, the tires screeching until we came to a halt 50 yards down the road. In the rearview mirror, I saw a shape huddled on the asphalt. It didn't move. The silence that followed was louder than the crash. Brandon was hyperventilating, his hands trembling on the steering wheel. Sirens were already wailing in the distance. He looked at me, and for a second, I saw the little boy who used to run to me when he had a nightmare. But that boy was gone. He looked at the glove box and told me to get his cigarettes, his voice high and frantic. As I reached over, my head spinning with shock, the police cars pulled up, their blue and red lights stroking the interior of the car. And then the betrayal happened. It was so fast, so calculated, that it felt like a physical blow to my chest. As the officers approached the window with their flashlights drawn, Brandon didn't confess. He didn't even hesitate. He pointed at me, his voice breaking into a fake sob. He told the officers that I had been driving. He said I was the one who was speeding, that I was reckless, and that I had forced him to switch seats with me the moment we stopped, because I didn't want to lose my business. I looked at him, my mouth hanging open, waiting for the punchline. But there wasn't one. He looked the officer in the eye and lied with a fluency that made my blood run cold. He played the traumatized son, the victim of a powerful mother's ego. I looked at the dark shape in the road, the life that had been extinguished because of my son's arrogance, and in that moment, a twisted, poisonous sense of maternal duty rose up in me. I thought about what prison would do to him. I thought about his future, his life. I was 50 years old. I had lived. He was just starting. I stayed silent. I let them put the handcuffs on me. I let them read me my rights. I took the blame for vehicular manslaughter, thinking that this ultimate sacrifice would finally be the thing that changed him. I thought that by giving him my freedom, I would finally buy his love and his redemption. I was wrong. I was sentenced to 7 years in a state penitentiary. The first year was a blur of gray concrete, the smell of industrial bleach, and the constant rhythmic clanging of heavy steel doors. Prison is not like the movies. It is a slow, grinding erosion of your humanity. You are no longer a person. You are a number. I spent my days in the laundry room, the steam wilting my spirit, and my nights staring at a tiny patch of sky through a barred window. But the physical hardship was nothing compared to the agony of the silence. I waited for him. Every visiting day, I sat in that plastic chair, my eyes glued to the door, waiting for the name Brandon to be called. It never was. A month went by, 6 months, a year, 2 years. Not a single letter, not a single phone call, not a single cent for my commissary. I eventually learned the truth through my friend Cindy, who was the only one who stayed loyal. She told me that Brandon was living like a king. He had moved Alex into my house. He was selling off my jewelry, my cars, and pieces of my art collection to fund their lifestyle. He was telling everyone that I was a monster, a drunk who had ruined an innocent man's life, and that he was the real victim. He was waiting for me to die in there, Cindy said. He was openly talking about how he hoped the stress would take me out, so he could finally inherit the business and the rest of the estate without having to deal with the shame of my release. He hadn't been changed by my sacrifice. He had been emboldened by it. He thought he had gotten away with the perfect crime because his mother was a fool. The anger didn't come all at once. It was a slow burn, a steady heat that began to replace the cold hollow in my chest. I spent the next 4 years studying. I worked with the prison library, and I reached out to a man named Larry. Larry was a sharp, relentless defense attorney who specialized in wrongful convictions and post-conviction relief. He visited me, and for the first time in years, I told the truth. I told him about the switch. I told him about the cigarettes in the glove box and the forensic evidence that the police had ignored because of my confession. We worked in the shadows. Cindy gathered bank records showing Brandon's systematic looting of my accounts. Larry found a witness, a homeless man who had been sleeping in the park that night and had seen the driver climb out of the passenger side after the crash. It took time. It took years of meticulous, quiet labor. But 6 months before my full sentence was up, the truth was officially recognized by the courts. My conviction was vacated. I was a free woman. But I didn't want the world to know. Not yet. I wanted to see just how deep Brandon's depravity went. I needed to know if there was even a shred of the son I loved left in that man. I moved into a small, quiet house in a neighboring town. Larry and I had grown close during the legal battle. He was a man of integrity and warmth, the complete opposite of the men I had known. We built a life in the quiet spaces, a life far removed from the glitz and glamour of my previous world. But I had one final task to complete. I asked Cindy to perform one last favor. She accidentally ran into Brandon at a high-end restaurant where he was celebrating Alex's birthday. She looked him in the eye, her face a mask of false grief, and told him that the stress of prison had finally been too much. She told him that I had passed away in my sleep a week before my scheduled release. The way Cindy described his reaction made me feel like I was back in that freezing prison cell. He didn't cry. He didn't even pause his meal. He simply put down his fork, looked at Alex, and grinned. He told the waiter to bring their most expensive bottle of champagne. He spent the next week buying a bespoke designer suit and a new watch, telling Alex that the old bird had finally done them a favor. He was thrilled. He was ecstatic. He called my lawyer's office every single day, demanding to know when the will would be read and when he could finally take control of the company. He didn't ask where I was buried. He didn't ask if I had any last words. He just wanted the gold. The day of the will reading was a cold, overcast morning. Brandon swaggered into Larry's mahogany-paneled office, Alex draped on his arm like a trophy. He was wearing the suit he had bought with my money, looking every bit the grieving heir he wasn't. Larry sat behind his desk, his face unreadable. He waited until Brandon had settled into the leather chair, leaning forward with an eager, hungry look in his eyes. Brandon didn't even offer a greeting. He just asked how long this was going to take and when he could sign the papers to transfer the deeds. Larry didn't say a word. He simply reached for a remote and turned on a large television mounted on the wall. The screen flickered to life, and Brandon's face went from smug to ghostly white in a heartbeat. It was a video. I was sitting in a sun-drenched living room, holding a tiny, beautiful baby girl in my arms. I looked younger, healthier, and happier than I had in 20 years. The baby was my daughter, Maya, whom Larry and I had been blessed with shortly after my release. In the video, I looked directly into the camera, directly into Brandon's soul. I told him that I was alive. I told him that I knew everything. I told him that I had watched him celebrate my death while I was busy building a real family with a man who actually knew the meaning of the word. I revealed that while I was in prison, I had worked with Larry to legally restructure every single one of my assets. I had sold the business to a silent partner months ago. I had emptied every trust fund, every offshore account, and every savings bond. I watched Brandon's hands start to shake on the television screen. In the video, I told him that he was officially disowned. I had left him exactly one thing in the will: the deed to a tiny, run-down, one-room apartment in the worst part of the city, the very same neighborhood where I had started my life as a struggling single mother. I told him that since he loved the struggle so much, he could have it all to himself. I told him that the gravy train had derailed and that he was now exactly what he had always accused me of being: nothing. I told him that karma doesn't always come with a loud bang. Sometimes it comes with a quiet video and a closed door. The breakdown was spectacular. Brandon didn't just cry, he wailed. He made a sound like a wounded animal, a high, thin screech of pure, selfish agony. He threw his head back and screamed at the ceiling, his face turning a mottled, ugly purple. He reached out for Alex, his hands trembling, looking for some kind of comfort. But Alex was already standing up. She looked at him, not with pity, but with a cold, sharp disgust. She realized in an instant that the man she had hitched her wagon to was now a penniless nobody. She didn't say a word. She didn't even look back. She adjusted her designer handbag, the one I had paid for, and walked out of the office, leaving him alone in the wreckage of his own greed. Brandon collapsed onto the floor, clutching the designer suit that was now the most valuable thing he owned, sobbing for a mother he had spent a decade trying to destroy. Now, I sit on my porch as the sun begins to set, watching Larry play with Maya in the grass. The air is sweet, and the house is full of a quiet, steady peace that I never knew was possible. I don't check up on Brandon. I don't need to. Cindy tells me he is working as a janitor at a local mall, living in that one-room apartment, surrounded by the ghosts of the life he threw away. I don't feel joy in his suffering, but I don't feel pity either. I have learned that a mother's love may be vast, but it is not a suicide pact. You cannot save someone who enjoys the fire. I have found a real family now, one built on respect and truth rather than sacrifice and lies. Life is a kitchen, and eventually, karma serves everyone the exact meal they spent their lives cooking. I am just glad that, for the first time in my life, I am finally sitting at a table where the food is honest and the love is real. I think back to those 7 years in the dark, and I realize they weren't a waste. They were a refining fire. They stripped away the woman who thought she could buy her son's soul, and they left behind a woman who knew her own worth. I look at Maya, and I know I will raise her differently. She will know the value of $1, but more importantly, she will know the value of a person. She will know that love is a two-way street, and that respect is the toll you pay to travel it. My son thought he could bury me, but he didn't realize I was a seed. I grew into something he could never understand, something strong and tall and completely out of his reach. The silence of my new life is my greatest treasure. There are no more midnight phone calls from jail, no more screaming matches over credit card bills, and no more desperate attempts to earn a smile from a man who only saw me as an ATM. Sometimes, the most loving thing you can do for a monster is to stop feeding it. You have to let them get hungry enough to realize what they've lost. Whether Brandon ever learns that lesson is no longer my concern. I have spent enough of my life living for him. The rest of my years belong to the man who fought for my freedom, and the little girl who reminds me every day that life is a gift, not a burden. If you are listening to this and you are struggling with a child who breaks your heart, I want you to know that it is okay to walk away. It is okay to stop sacrificing your light to keep them warm when they are the ones who started the fire. You are not a bad mother for demanding respect. You are not a failure for letting them face the world they created. We are told that we must endure everything, but that is a lie. We must endure for those who love us back. For the rest, we must simply endure until we can find the exit. The world is a large place, and there is so much more to it than the four walls of a toxic relationship. I found my peace in the middle of a storm, and I found my voice in the middle of a silence. I am Jennifer, and I am no longer a sacrifice. I am a woman who survived, a woman who thrived, and a woman who finally understands that the best revenge isn't hatred. It's living a life so full and so beautiful that the people who tried to destroy you become nothing more than a footnote in a much larger, much grander story. As Maya laughs and Larry catches her, swinging her around in the golden light of the afternoon, I feel a warmth that has nothing to do with the sun. It is the warmth of a life well lived. It is the satisfaction of knowing that the scales have finally been balanced. Brandon is in his cold room, and I am in the light. That is not cruelty, that is justice. And in the end, justice is the only thing that allows us to sleep soundly at night. So, hold your loved ones close, but hold your boundaries closer. Don't let your heart become a doormat for someone who doesn't even bother to wipe their feet. You deserve better. We all do. And sometimes the only way to get it is to let the fire burn itself out and start again from the ashes. The shadows are long now, stretching across the lawn, and the first stars are beginning to peek through the velvet blue of the sky. It's time to go inside, to the warmth and the laughter and the truth. My journey was long and painful, but it led me here. And here is exactly where I was always meant to be. The ungrateful sun is a ghost now, a memory of a version of myself I no longer recognize. I am whole, I am free, and I am finally home.